Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the first HELM Virtual Summit. My name is Bernadette Johnson. I am the Program Director for this summit. I also have the honor of working at Wits University. Please keep coming in and settle down. Make sure you have a glass of water, paper to write on, whatever you need to be comfortable. This morning coming in, I thought about last year, this time, when the USAf conference took place. We all went to the CSIR, and many of you would have flown in the night before. I was so excited about seeing colleagues and connecting. This again is an opportunity, and it is different. The summit offers the chance for you to connect, for you to reflect, and for us to think together. Try to set aside time to engage in the summit. What is the top leadership thinking? How is this impacting and reframing your leadership into the future? I invite your presence and your courage to be fully engaged. Now I'd like to shift onto the proceedings for the day and welcome Dr. Linda Meyer, who is the host for the day. Linda currently works as the Director of Operations and Sector Support at USAf. Her former positions include Dean and Academic Executive, the Head of Justice College, Chief Director, Corporate Services, and CCMA Commissioner. Welcome, and over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Welcome to the 2020 University South Africa and Higher Education and Leadership and Management Virtual Summit. We would like to acknowledge and thank the following dignitaries. Minister Bladen Zamande, the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation. Professor Sibongile Mutwa, the Vice-Chancellor of NMU and Chairperson of the USAf Board. Professor Ahmed Bawa, the CEO of USAf. Dr. Sizwe Mabizela, the Vice-Chancellor of Rhodes. Professor Francis Peterson, the Vice-Chancellor of UFS, Professor Twana Kupe, the Vice-Chancellor of UP, and Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, the VC-Designate of WITS, Dr. Diane Parker, the Deputy Director General for the Department of Higher Education and Training, Professor Badat, Professor Naidu, Mr. Esop, Mr. Ngasana, Mr. Maritz, Ms. Buchler, Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Oliver Seal. We welcome all delegates and all protocol observed. The summit theme this year is Leading and Managing the University in South Africa for Disruption, Complexity and Change. This year has been extraordinarily challenging, but has brought immense opportunity to embrace change. The program for today will commence with the opening and keynote address by the Honourable Minister, followed by a plenary address by Professor Ahmed Bawa. We will then proceed to a roundtable discussion that will be facilitated by Dr. Diane Parker and will include the following critical respondents: Professor Mutwa, Professor Peterson, and Dr. Sizwe Mabizela. We will break for lunch at 12:30 and recommence with 3 parallel sessions at 13:30. During the lunch break, delegates are invited to visit the exhibition and engagement lounge to connect with the other delegates. We encourage delegates to make use of the chat room. Comments will be dealt with in the collaborative forums. We look forward to an engaging and meaningful summit. On behalf of the USAf and HELM teams, we thank you for making the time to join us today. We now hand over to the USAf CEO, Professor Bawa, to introduce the Honourable Minister. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues, and it's such a pleasure to be here at this virtual summit of HELM. Minister, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you and also to introduce you for your talk this morning. And I want to just begin by thanking you so much for taking the time out to join us today. It means a lot to us in the sector and, of course, to HELM as well, the Higher Education Leadership and Management Program. Let me just begin by saying that to introduce the minister who doesn't really need an introduction, let me begin by saying that he grew up in Edendale in Pietermaritzburg, a place that became a real hub and center for the struggle during the 70s and 80s. And he had a role to play in that. But more importantly than just to say that he graduated from being a young boy in Edendale to being the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, which appointment was made on the 30th of May 2019. Before that, he was the Minister of Transport, and before that, he was the Minister of Higher Education and Training. During his first stint as Minister of Higher Education and Training, it was his inspiration that brought into being the post-school education and training sector, which was probably the biggest kind of disruptive change, if you like, to the higher education system during this last period. And one has to say that that has had an enormous influence on our higher education system and the general post-school education and training system. Dr. Nzimande has a PhD in industrial psychology from the University of what was the University of Natal. He lectured at the University of Zululand. He was a lecturer at University of Natal, and was a member of the council at several institutions. So he's somebody who's had a tremendous kind of influence on higher education for a long time and has a lot of experience in higher education. Perhaps most importantly, I should mention that much of his work at the University of Natal was at the Education Policy Unit, together with people like John Pampalis and so on. And in that period of time, that particular Education Policy Unit had a huge influence on the way in which the future policy emerged in the post-1994 period. He usually wears a red tie because he's the Secretary General of the South African Communist Party. And I have to say that, take this opportunity really for thanking him for his support of the HELM program at USAf, and of course of the Department of Higher Education and Training, without which we wouldn't be able to do the kind of work we do. With that, Minister, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being with us today, and also to say to you that we really look forward to your input today. Thank you so much.
To open the first Virtual Higher Education Leadership and Management Summit, to be held under the theme Leading and Managing the University in Africa for Disruption, Complexity and Change. This theme is critically relevant to those in higher education wishing to grapple with the transformational challenges facing not only the post-school education and training system, but arguably wider society. I say this because I do not think that one can properly understand leadership and management of the university in Africa, or for that matter, issues of disruption, complexity and change outside of a critical understanding of the wider contradictions of our time. Right now, the whole world is seized with the struggle to combat the pernicious effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and our universities have been in the forefront of the struggle. And I must take this opportunity also to thank USAf and all our universities who have incorporated with us as a ministry and as a department in managing what may go down as one of the most difficult years in our university, in the history of our universities. But the COVID-19 crisis is also connected to a wider set of crises, of social inequality, of climate change, of technological disruption, and linked to all of the above, a crisis of the global capitalist system itself. What is clear to me is that unequal ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic is manifesting itself, together with the climate and technological changes, are all deeply connected to the nature of this system. In fact, we cannot speak of a sustainable, let alone equal society, unless we simultaneously also wage struggles for a more just global society and a better and more inclusive global economic and social order. We have to ground ourselves in that, even as universities. Referring to the conference theme, I want to suggest that delegates might want to consider debating the issues of disruption, complexity, and change in the context of 4 interrelated historical concerns facing the entire post-school education and training sector. Firstly, and related to the point made earlier, is the central question of the role of public universities in promoting fundamental structural transformation of society. That is to say, the struggle for a more inclusive, equal society. How can our universities be in the forefront of the quest for a more sustainable alternative? The Fees Must Fall protests of 2015 to 2017 have produced a new wave of ideals and energies which have sparked a wide range of curriculum, pedagogic, research and innovation experiments at almost all of our universities. The question we have to ask is, how is this energy leading a movement from universities into society? Secondly, the second concern is contextual factor. For universities to promote the goals of an equal, inclusive societies, they must themselves be equal and inclusive. And key to this is the challenge of transforming what I would call the dominant relations of knowledge production within our universities, which frankly are still largely patriarchal, racialized, and reproduce the dominant class inequalities in society. How can we, for instance, use the COVID-19 moment to pose deeper questions about the knowledge producers and type of knowledge of the academic system? How far are we in the development of Black and women academics in scholarship? How far are we in the redress of institutional inequalities faced by our historically Black and rural universities? And where are we in the reconstruction of curricula that presents fresh alternatives to the dominant discourses of the wider economic and social order? Of course, this must also be related to current challenges. The one immediate thing I can think about is that one of the crises we are facing is deepening economic crisis. And the president has placed an economic recovery plan before us. Universities mustn't walk alongside this. They need to unashamedly and unapologetically participate in shaping such a strategy, which is one of the key issues on how we emerge post-COVID-19 or post the lockdown. The third issue, I think conference is also presented with an opportunity to address the challenge of conflict management and resolution at our university. I'm very concerned about this matter, I must say, and I hope you will place it very high on the agenda of your discussions on such a theme, because it's one of the complexities. It's one of the disruptions in a negative way in many instances. I come from a political and intellectual tradition that argues that without struggle, there will be no change. But this belief does not mean that such struggles must be violent and destructive, especially in a democratic society. We have to replace traditions where stakeholders tend to destroy public buildings and threaten others with campaigns in a manner that is not constructive. We have to grapple with this as we look at our universities today, especially issues of leadership, disruption, and other complexities. It cannot be that present and future struggles for change by some stakeholders are lived out in the same way in which we struggled as students in the 1970s and 1980s under apartheid. The fourth issue, which is a contextual issue, one of the historical concerns, which I've spoken about earlier, but I want to pose it much sharper and slightly differently. And I would like that we place this issue very high up on our agenda, is the question of the absolute necessity to build a durable and sustainable public university system, both in South Africa and the African continent. Building strong public universities is one of the key challenges, I would say, is facing our country and the continent. South Africa, in this regard, we can argue, has built a relatively strong, if unequal, public university system but that is increasingly facing huge challenges and threats. Increasingly relying on student fees with diminishing public investment by government while simultaneously bursting at the seams. In fact, it's very interesting that without the public system that we've built in South Africa, even the contribution that we are making in the continent as South African universities, we wouldn't be where we are. But this is under threat. A related question, of course, in this regard, question of building strong and resilient public universities, which is what I believe we need in our situation, is what kind of partnerships do we need to forge between a public university system with the private sector, and most importantly, with communities and civil society. Now, let me move then to just look into the challenges of the current academic year, because we have to ground ourselves in today's realities, even if we are to grapple with the issues that are part of this theme. Under COVID-19, we've noted a number of universities are pointing to better student performance in comparison to previous year's performance. That's part of our own assessment from the reports we are getting from yourselves as South African universities in trying to grapple with completing the 2020 academic year. We have interrogated the reasons for this performance and found multiple contributory factors, although inconclusive at this stage, I would say, but nevertheless, they are important to reflect upon, because we are still to conduct more assessment across all of our teaching and learning parameters, especially after completing the 2020 academic year. Our initial assessment indicates that during this period of COVID-19, we had positive impact in many areas. As the English saying goes, every cloud has got its silver lining. The first positive impact we've had is on the multimodal blended approach to teaching and learning. Secondly, the opportunities provided to students to learn in different ways. And thirdly, multiple assessment methods. That's in terms of our initial assessment, that these have made a very positive impact. It is therefore unavoidable, as one lesson we can learn out of this, that blended and multimodal learning, including digital and online learning, should become a standard feature for our future post-school education and training system, not just only universities. In this regard, I wish to say that I intend to set up a ministerial task team in the new year to help us develop strategies to make online learning a reality in our sector beyond the existential challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, I would like that USAf participates in this ministerial task team and also cooperate with it, because I don't want to do this narrowly as a ministerial issue. It's a sector issue. Having said that, we'll have to take into consideration the class and spatial legacies of the past, which continues to impair the ability of many of our students to fully take advantage of learning opportunities presented by digital platforms. I don't want to isolate a chairperson, program director, UNISA here, but I am having a ministerial task team that is looking at the mandate of UNISA and its operating model. One question that comes up is that UNISA now is no longer going to be the only player in online or even part distance or even digital learning. All other universities are getting into this. And what are the implications of this for UNISA? And what are the implications for our system as a whole? But I don't want to divert, but it's an important issue. Part of our major consideration, therefore, should be the selection of our program offerings, resource allocations, enrollment planning process, as well as the identification and development of new qualifications and programs in line with the needs of our economy and society. For example, I've just recently released a national list of occupations in high demand in South Africa, about a week or so ago. And the list tells us which occupations are likely to have what vacancies and which occupations are likely to grow due to new investments, especially by government. I urge you, by the way, to study closely this list, which we update in 2 years' time. During the past 2 decades, the world of higher education has also changed dramatically, with significant implications for university governance, leadership, and management. It is again unequivocal that the South African post-school education and training sector is in transition and grappling with major challenges arising from these global and local development initiatives. There is no doubt, in my mind, Program Director, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, that the sectoral and institutional disruptions and protests by students and other stakeholders in South Africa in the form of hashtag Rose Must Fall, hashtag Fees Must Fall, and hashtag Open Stellenbosch movements have presented a new and challenging environment for current and future managers and leaders of higher education to operate in. It appears nowadays that traditional methods of governance, leadership, and management have been challenged by demands from students and other stakeholders like organized labor for more democratized forms of governance, leadership, and decision-making. Another threat facing our post-school education and training system is the growing corruption characterizing some, though not all, of our universities. As the post-school sector, we therefore need to intensify our campaign against corruption and state capture tendencies and redeem the image of our institution. But for universities, I would like to add an extra responsibility that we have to take into account in grappling with corruption. We also have to study and research very deeply the impact of corruption. For instance, sometimes I wish I was a full-time researcher just to concentrate on analyzing what is coming out of the Zondo Commission. What is that telling us about our post-1994 political and economic trajectory as a country? Universities need to go deeper also into doing more research and analysis if we are to finally defeat the scourge of corruption. We need to work closely with our law enforcement agencies, obviously, over and above, of course, doing research, which I think that our universities, that's part of dealing with, as your theme says, with the current complexities. Part of the disruptions we must experience is to disrupt this trajectory of corruption that is becoming embedded in our systems. We must not forget that our institutions are places for education and intellectual empowerment, especially for our youth, and not places for tenders and self-enrichment. You will have my full support as universities in fighting this battle. I cannot even begin to stress the necessity for us to turn our institutions into safe havens for all the women who work and study at our institutions. We must wage a war against gender-based violence and patriarchy. We must adopt deliberate and guided programs to ensure that we transform our institutions to reflect the social and intellectual diversity of our society by ensuring the representativity of women and blacks in the management echelons of our universities and emergence of new unorthodox ideas capable of challenging the dominant ones. Let me relate this to the earlier point I've said, which is one thing that is really preoccupying me. The absolute centrality of the need to transform the relations of knowledge production. We cannot fight gender-based violence and gender stereotypes and gender discrimination unless also that's embedded in our struggle to transform relations of knowledge production, especially the gender relations of knowledge production. In other words, there is a very clear interaction between the structural foundation of gender inequalities and discrimination, as well as the processes of knowledge production. In other words, in the language I'm used to, the material, we must tackle both the material and the ideological dimension of gender inequalities in our institutions and wider society. Some writers and commentators also suggest that the higher education sector has a leadership crisis and requires a new kind of leadership and management that is attuned to transformation, pluralism on the one hand, and performativity and efficiency on the other. I'm just fascinated, for instance, about this recent debate on the appointment of only the 5th woman vice-chancellor at UNISA. And looking at some of the struggles that are actually being waged about that, one can see that we still have difficulties about affirming women leadership in our institutions. It may seem just one isolated incident, but just looking at the noises and the struggles around that, it reflects a deeper problem. Program Director, in South Africa, the notion of university leadership has only recently expanded to a broader understanding that includes head of academic departments, head of academic schools, deans and deputies, as well as administrative leadership. I would even argue student leadership is a key component of our broader understanding of leadership. That's why I appreciate this initiative and we support it as a department, because it has helped us to broaden our understanding of what leadership is in the higher education sector. Now, their need of these leaders for structural and systematic training development programs is acute in both the academic and administrative domains of universities. It is for these reasons that we are supporting the HELM program fully. I commit myself to continue to support this program as long as I am still minister in this space. Although the HELM program has been in existence since 2002, it achieved a focused strategic direction in 2017 with financial support through the University Capacity Development Program and direct input from the Department of Higher Education and Training in partnership with Universities South Africa. I must also thank my management, especially Dr. Parker, for the energies that she has actually put into this. And indeed, without your cooperation, we would not be where we are. Now, reconfigured in 2018, HELM offers valuable perspectives on the contemporary leadership and management context, complexities and challenges facing universities. The need has never been greater for HELM to provide all levels of university leadership and management with skills, strategies, and insight into this ever-shifting terrain. HELM, that is the Higher Education Leadership Management mission, is to explore and create relevant and cutting-edge solutions that build organizational and individual capacity needs in universities. The overarching objective is to ensure that the higher education system is endowed with leaders and managers able to drive their institutions towards transformed future. Another new development on the horizon is the University Lecturer Development Program. And also I must say that the successful partnership between this initiative and our department has already resulted in some exciting outcomes, such as the pilot in Women in Leadership program, which was launched online in September this year and ends in March 2021 with 26 participants from 17 universities. We have witnessed, Program Director, globally, a temptation within some of the parts of the education sector to indulge in a kind of short-termism, where universities deal with immediate crises in the belief that if we hold out, things will go to pass and it will be business as usual again. I'm sure you will agree with me that the sector cannot go back to the old ways of operating, and that we have to think, plan, and act in view of the long-term challenges facing us. This summit is based on a series of probing questions that seek to provoke new ways of thinking. I don't want to speak forever. I just want to highlight, maybe just venture some few responses to some of these questions. I'm not going to speak to all of them. I've got my speech, which I will leave with you, where those things I would not have spoken to you can actually look at, because I'm conscious of the fact that we need maximum time to engage rather than to listening to ministerial speeches only. What I just want to say is that fresh and dynamic thinking is required during periods of disruption, complexity, and change. That is the platform which this summit provides. We have organized around 5 thematic questions which are very important. 1, how can leadership lead in the age of complexity? This is an important question, which means, amongst other things, navigating the complex ecosystem of leadership presents an unprecedented challenge and opportunity for innovation in leadership. That in itself, by the way, requires what kind of ecosystem, even a leadership micro ecosystem, do we need in our institutions? I've touched on some of those points earlier, including, by the way, capacity to manage conflict. The other issue, how do we develop sustainable, resilient higher education institutions? I've inserted here the issue, I know it may be a point of debate, of the need to build public universities in the continent. I'm raising this knowing very well that the drift in the continent at the moment, with the exception, partial exception of South Africa, is private universities that are emerging, some of which are literally fly-by-night institutions. We have actually also having in the continent a decline in the prestige and operations of what were once very prestigious institutions. Your Makerere universities, your University of Dar es Salaam, University of Dar, as it was known, University of Zimbabwe in its heyday, at some stage, and many other institutions. And we are seeing many private institutions, some which are good but small, catering only for the elite and not catering for the majority. So the issue of sustainable and resilient public higher education institutions, let me hear your views on this. You are more knowledgeable being on the coalface. Now, what we need, if one is to paraphrase the European Union, what it is saying about its future economies, the European Union says, post-COVID-19, our economies must not bounce back. Our economies must bounce forward. In other words, post-lockdown and post-COVID-19, our universities must not bounce back, they must bounce forward. In other words, we need to be operating in new ways. The other issue, how do we develop critical, compassionate, and creative citizens of the future? A very important question. And I want to say, while critical citizenship is required in strengthening and deepening democracy, recognition of each other and compassion towards each other is required in building strong communities within a democracy. What is technology disruption? The issue of the fourth industrial revolution. I do feel, though, that our universities, maybe I'm reading too generally, will excuse me. I think this issue of the fourth industrial revolution, the new technologies, your artificial intelligence, your robotics, your machine and deep learning and so on are very important things. We ourselves are going to be establishing a dedicated University of Science and Innovation, which will be led by one of my advisors, Professor Derek Swartz. And I would like USAf to be part of this. We want to do this together with you. And I'm seeing a university that should be supporting the rest of the system rather than a conventional standalone university. But I don't think that as I say, you are being critical enough of the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. I hope you will engage with the report of the ministerial task team on the fourth industrial revolution and its implications for post-school education and training as part of discussing this matter and moving forward beyond this. Issue of institutional cultures is a very crucial issue, and it relates to the issues that I was relating to, and fundamentally for me, to my question of the necessity to transform the relations of knowledge production. I know some of my colleagues will say, well, I'm plagiarizing this knowledge, this concept of relations of production. Indeed, I am. And you know very well where it comes from, but it's very important in the space of knowledge. My sincere wish, ladies and gentlemen, is that these questions will not only stimulate critical thinking, but also begin to propel us on a creative journey towards new solutions and possibilities for not only South African higher education, but wider society as well. I'm sorry, Program Director, if I've taken a bit long, but let me take this opportunity to wish all of you to continue being safe in the light of this coronavirus that we are faced with, and also to say on my part, I also wish you a happy festive season. It's a silly season, don't drop your guard in terms of safety, and also wishing you a happy 2021. Truly speaking, 2020 has been horrible in so many ways, and we hope that we will actually have a better year. But I'm convinced, working together with yourselves, nothing will stand on our way in creating this transformed inclusive university system in our country. Thank you very much. Ngiyabonga.
Minister, I have to really just take this opportunity now of thanking you very much for joining us today and understanding just how, how busy you are and for taking your time out to present a really substantial sort of agenda for the rest of the meeting. The purpose of the virtual summit was indeed to try and work out an agenda for HELM over the next period of time. And I think that you've laid out a set of challenges, I think, which are fundamental to the success, the future sustainability and success of the higher education system. So thank you very much, and we'll, of course, report back to you and talk to you on a frequent basis about the progress that is being made. And I'd like to take this opportunity again, saying thank you so much, and wish you as well a happy festive season and so on. And let's all be safe, of course, because of what looks like a second wave that's beginning to emerge in South Africa as well of COVID-19. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good luck with the rest of your program, Professor Bawa. Ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before we proceed, we would just like to remind you that all of the sessions will be available on Events Mobi and will also be loaded on YouTube after the construct of the summit. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Ahmed Bawa, the CEO of University South Africa. Until 2016, Professor Bawa was the Vice Chancellor and Principal of Durban University of Technology, and he also served as the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Natal, which later became the University of KwaZulu-Natal. At the City University of New York, he was a faculty member in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, at Hunter College as a member of the doctoral faculty and graduate center. He was appointed Associate Provost for Curriculum Development. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics from Durham University in the UK. As the Program Officer for Higher Education in Africa with the Ford Foundation, he led the Foundation for African Higher Education Initiatives. In the portfolio, he worked in South Africa, Namibia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, and Palestine. He served on a number of advisory boards. Professor Bawa holds a PhD, as we said, from the University of Durham in the UK, and he has published in many areas. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Professor Bawa is really the stalwart of our sector. He is the glue that holds us all together, and we thank him every day for being the leader with a minister that has taken us through this very, very, very difficult time of COVID-19. Professor Bawa.
Thank you so much, Linda. And again, let me just welcome you all to this HELM Virtual Summit. And it really is an important meeting for all of us because it really does allow us the opportunity of really laying down an agenda for HELM for the next 4 or 5 years. It's quite clear from what the Minister said earlier on today, just how important it is for us to look at the current sort of echelons of leadership, but also to focus on building a pipeline for future leadership. And a lot of the work of HELM really focuses on that second point, the idea of developing a strong pipeline of individuals who can emerge into leadership positions in our university sector. I must also just emphasize that HELM doesn't just work with vice chancellors or with deputy vice chancellors, but it works with people in the higher education sector at all levels with the idea of developing this pipeline, if you like. I've been asked today to reflect a little bit on kind of leaders of change and complexity, and I hope that what I say today will add something new. We all have ideas about this, of course, and many of you, of course, are at the kind of coalface, if you like, and addressing these issues right at this moment. So a lot of this might not be very new to you, and well, some of it might not be at all new to you. So I hope very much that some of it at least will be new. There's no question about the fact that COVID-19 has really applied a stress test to our universities. I hate using that phrase, but which comes from the 2008 recession. But it does seem to me to be a valuable concept, if you like. As we know, in March this year, the university sector just ground to an absolute halt, a total shutdown, if you like. And then there had to be this kind of restart, if you like, or reboot of the higher education sector, taking into account all the challenges that we face with regard to COVID-19. And I think that perhaps one of the things to say is that, we've made significant progress, as the minister indicated in his speech earlier today. We've had to reconstitute our academic programs using multiple pathways to complete the academic year. And as we stand at the moment, all 26 universities are on track to complete the academic year, although in a staggered fashion. Of course, our administrative systems continue to function throughout. The research kind of enterprise was severely affected, especially experimental research. And one has to say that that even there are indications that significant work did happen during the lockdown, but more importantly, that once the lockdown went into level 1, alert level 1, that most of our research activities are back online. With changes, of course, especially where there's field work involved and so on. There's been significant repurposing of budgets for two major purposes. The one is just the repurposing of budgets for the emergence of remote emergency kind of online learning, teaching and learning, if you like. And secondly, for the preparation of our universities for the reintroduction of students and staff as we moved from level 5 into level 1 of the lockdown. And of course, there's also just the whole issue around trying to understand how to shift from kind of face-to-face administration, face-to-face teaching and learning to remote learning, and all the implications of that for staff preparedness and student preparedness for work, for off-site work, if you like, or for online work, one should say. And of course, then the major challenge of trying to ensure that our campuses were safe for the re-entry of staff and students once that was possible. There are many lessons that have been learned during this period. And I'll just kind of name a couple of them. I mean, the one is just, on the one hand, to understand how resilient our universities are, that they were able in such a short period of time to re-establish kind of modes of operation and so on. But at the same time, to understand how fragile they were, that actually just how the sustainability of those universities, all 26 universities, just the extent to which their sustainability has been brought into question with significant financial crises and so on, and the extent to which that fragility is going to have an enormous impact on the long-term sustainability of our institutions. What the COVID-19 did most effectively and sadly was to really highlight the deep inequalities in our system. And by the way, those inequalities are not just between kind of different institutions in our system, but also within institutions, the inequalities faced by students on a daily basis and so on, and the impact that had on trying to address the challenges of COVID-19. What it also brought into account was just the extent of the interdependence of our institutions. I mean, just the fact that we've seen unprecedented collaboration between our institutions in trying to address this enormous challenge that has been posed by COVID-19. And I think that one has to say that interdependence has taught us that we have to work as a sector, that whenever it's possible, we should work as a sector. that lots of the problems are intransigent, really, if we try to deal with them on an institution by institution basis, and that we have to depend on working together whenever that is possible. One of the most important outcomes, for me at least, during this period has been to understand just how nimble our universities are, that when the need was there, when there was pressure, that our institutions were able to address many of those challenges with a kind of nimbleness, and that has been very important to see. One of the things that has emerged, and I think that we have to accept that had it not been for a significant amount of partnership building across the different players in the higher education sector during this time, we would not have achieved what we have achieved. So the Department of Higher Education Training, the university sector, the TVET sector, the the Council on Higher Education, all sort of working together with other players, NSFAS, all working together, trying to find solutions together, that has been a fundamental ability for us to address the challenges of COVID-19. And I'd like to just emphasize that what that means is that we really have to think more seriously about how to build this higher education ecosystem, if you like. We have to just remind ourselves continuously that COVID-19, in a sense, really follows on the huge challenges that faced our sector with the student activism during Roads Must Fall and Feeds Must Fall campaign, during those campaigns. And I think that we have to think of those periods, those struggles of student, those periods of student activism. We have to see them also as periods of disruption, as periods that really force our institutions and our sector to focus in on major challenges that face not just our sector but the nation as a whole. And of course, prior to Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, there was always the financial aid conundrum at our universities. Insufficient funding, the dysfunctionality of NSFAS, notwithstanding the fact that, I should mention very quickly that NSFAS has improved tremendously over the last period of time. But the dysfunctionality of NSFAS in the earlier period, leading to sort of annual kind of tensions and pressures at our campuses, on our campuses. Just the challenges of student accommodation, which really tracks the change in the student demographic at our universities. And then, of course, as the Minister pointed out, just the major issues that continue to bug us relating to the transformation of our sector. These are deep-seated challenges, and in some ways they kind of reflect a broken social compact, the social compact that bound us together in the post-1994 period, the outcomes of the National Commission on Higher Education that gave rise to the Higher Education Act and to the National Higher Education Plan and so on. All of that policy paraphernalia, if you like, that in some senses what hit us between 2015 and 2017 was really an indication that social compact that emerged during that period has broken down, and that we need to work towards a new social compact, if you like. There are some systemic issues, and the Minister has already kind of referred to many of these, but I'll just run through them very quickly. That we still have a continuing apartheid architecture of the higher education landscape, and we can't escape the challenges that this poses. Notwithstanding the fact that there has been a lot of progress in recent years to address them, we still very easily talk about historically disadvantaged and historically advantaged institutions and so on. There's chronic underfunding of higher education, and I think that that's something that we have to begin to engage with the government and with other role players in the country. We have a broken basic education system, and notwithstanding the fact that there are signs of improvement, but we really have to begin to understand how to produce a basic education system that facilitates much more significant development amongst young students in that basic education system. In the higher education sector, the issues around access and success, and in particular the second part of that, the success issue, really continues to be a huge challenge for our sector. Of course, that is, to some extent, that is tied to the issue of the basic education system, but it's not just a challenge that can be addressed at that basic education system, that there's a need for us to also think quite hard about how the higher education sector can take on that challenge. Of course, one of the most significant challenges we face is the state of the economy and the uptake of graduates by the economy, by the labor market and so on. And just the idea of trying to understand what the impact might be if the uptake of graduates decreases over the next 4 to 5 years. That will have enormous consequences for the future sustainability of the higher education system. We speak repeatedly about the research and innovation chasm, just the fact that although we've had a significant increase in research output in South Africa, we have not yet seen a significant increase in the translation of that research into products through processes of innovation. And that's something that we have to continue to focus on. And again, I don't want to give the impression that there isn't any of this going on, but we have to focus on it. We have an incomplete PSET sector. That's something that bothers me a lot, and it's something that we have to talk about. Something that we've raised with the minister previously is the need for us to construct a national digital teaching and learning ecosystem, something that will serve all 26 universities and the TVT sector. That's something that really has to be a national project. On a more kind of philosophical level, it seems to me that we really have to deal with the social ownership of our universities. Just who owns the universities? Why is there such a low level of social ownership of our universities? That's something, it's a deeply philosophical question, but it's also a practical question, and one that we have to deal with. The second issue is the issue around the long-term sustainability of our universities. And it's not just about the financial sustainability, but it's also about the production of the new generation of academics, a new generation of scientists and so on, and really working hard at trying to ensure that our university system is sustainable from that point of view. And then, of course, just the whole issue around universities in context, both the local context and the global context, trying to understand how we can build our universities to be deeply connected locally and simultaneously to be significant global players, if you like. And of course, it would be foolish for us not to understand that there are also deeply serious kind of institutional issues. We often sense that there's ineffective leadership and management at our institutions, that there are broken kind of governance systems, and these have to be dealt with. And there's a big question about whether we need a kind of a new approach to governance. I think the minister kind of referred to that to some extent, and maybe we should really focus in on that. There's the continuous battle with the lack of sufficient resources, especially at the historically disadvantaged institutions, and we really have to kind of focus in on that. There are serious infrastructure challenges. There's incomplete imaginations of the role of institutions, and in particular, just this idea of trying to understand how we can link the teaching and learning and the research enterprise at our universities with the challenges of development wherever our universities are placed. And of course, I think we have to address the issue of the continuing instability of our universities and to try and understand how to address those. COVID-19, without question, kind of has highlighted so many of these. I mean, in some ways, COVID-19 kind of pre-existed the arrival of the virus. I mean, in some senses, all the conditions that gave rise to the outcomes of the COVID-19 really pre-existed the arrival of the virus. The virus, in a sense, was a catalyst that gave rise to all these big challenges. And in some ways, I think we have to begin to think of this point of disruption as forcing us to begin to think about the nature of the challenges that lay ahead. We have to begin to think about universities as anchor institutions in the communities and cities and provinces in which they are based. We have to begin to address the issue of how universities can address social justice issues. That we have to go beyond rhetoric, if you like. And it's not simply about social mobility. That's critically important, of course. But it is really about understanding how to galvanize the capacity of universities to build a more socially just society. It is about decolonizing the curriculum. The 2015-2017 struggles of students has really awakened in us deep challenges around our curricula and so on. So we have to address those. We have to think very seriously about the accelerated uptake of technology in teaching and learning and research. Are we going to be shifting into blended working situations? Are we going to need all the office space that we have? Are we going to be able to turn office space into laboratories and so on? Just major questions around the nature of work. There are also big risks associated with this moment. The unbundling of universities is something that has both positive and negative implications for the higher education sector. And are we kind of thinking about those? What has been completely clear is just the need for us to build strategic partnerships, both within the sector and between universities and other social actors, if you like. And then, of course, there's a whole range of other questions relating to credentialing and so on. The notion of the blockchain university, does it have implications for us? Is it the path of the future or not? And so on. It is a time for reimagination, and it's a time for recalibration. And it seems to me that as universities, we have a role to play, not just in our own kind of reimagination, our own recalibration, but also for presenting special kind of opportunities for other parts of society. And I've been asked to reflect a little bit on complexity, and I want to just present a little, just take this as an opportunity to kind of really indicate that there's a lot of kind of intersections between trying to understand complex systems and in physics, for example, and complex institutions. And I want to just, without going into any detail, just kind of indicate, that if one thinks about complex systems in physics, at least, what one thinks about are complex systems that are highly composite, made up of lots of parts, and that these parts kind of mutually interact with each other, if you like. They kind of influence each other. And that through repeated interactions, they can result either in kind of really catastrophic kind of outcomes where you see no order, or you see very rich collective behavior. Those are actual solutions where you deal with with complex physical systems, if you like. And that this kind of collective behavior then feeds back into individual behavior of individual units, if you like. Yeah. If one just thinks about those characteristics of a complex system, one immediately comes up with the idea that universities are devilishly complex, and that we have to find ways of kind of really managing this complexity. Universities have many moving parts. We have complex governance systems, councils, senates, faculty boards, student organizations, and so on. Lots of moving parts in the governance systems. And of course, there's government, there's the Council on Higher Education, there's the business community. All of those contribute to shaping the behavior of the governance systems, if you like. there are many institutional internal constituencies, and there are many external stakeholders. And as I indicated, all of this articulates with the national education system, if you like. And of course, it has to articulate with the economy and with local communities and so on. So one can imagine just the extent to which universities are complex, because all of these influence each other and so on. And if we keep in mind at least that the primary purpose of universities is to build new generations of intellectuals, of new generations of professionals and artists and scientists and so on, that the challenge we all face is to try and understand how to galvanize this complexity to produce the best possible outcome in terms of producing fantastic young intellectuals, which our society needs desperately. The problem with complexity, as I mentioned earlier, is that a complex system like a university has a high propensity to slide into conditions of chaos. And one has to understand that we have to develop systems to try and understand how to prevent that from happening. And what I would like to just share some thoughts about before I move towards some completion is that when we think about our universities, we have to think of them in the following way. We have to design for complexity. We have to understand, and there are ways to do this, in fact, just to design for complexity. We have to design for integration. We have to try and understand that reductionist approaches just do not work, that we have to move towards integrated approaches, that we have to try and understand that by bringing people together from different silos to work together really provides for an opportunity to deal with this complexity. And then we have to design for learning, institutional learning, continuous institutional learning, so that there's a continuous flow of knowledge and information within the system that adds to a toolkit, if you like, to deal with complexity. And of course, what it means is that we have to shift from kind of individual learning to social learning, so that this integration can take place in a more effective way. And it seems to me, at least, that there are two things that I would like to focus on. The one is just the idea that each institution really has to have a set of anchor ideas, around which it kind of designs for complexity. So universities, we all know, universities are knowledge-intensive institutions. We have to focus on that. We have to focus on the social ownership of our universities. We have to focus on universities as contributing to building social justice. We have to optimize the articulation of universities and the economy, and so on. We have to try and understand what are the key anchor ideas around which to design for complexity. And then just to say that, one of the, for me at least, perhaps the most salient points will be to really understand that there's a need for us to shift away from reductionism into an integrated approach. Reductionism has been very successful, by the way, in physics, in subjects like physics, for example. But we all know that reductionism doesn't take us to kind of integrated solutions, that there's a need for us to adopt an integrated approach, that we have to develop the capacity for soft touches, because in these complex systems, different parts react even violently to small changes that are made in one part of the system. So the idea being that we have to try and find ways of working with soft touches. And that just means that we have to understand very carefully issues of non-linearity. We have to kind of unpack this, of course, but it's something for us to kind of begin to work with. And I think ultimately it's for us to see complexity as the potential source for beauty, in as much as we can see complexity as a potential source for chaos. So just to say that, from my point of view at least, that when we think about this process of now of reimagining, recalibrating, and so on, that we think about this also in terms of adopting an approach which understands the deep influences of complexity at our institutions and in the system more generally. With that, let me thank you for listening to me, and I hope that this virtual summit, this HELM virtual summit, is of use to you. And from our point of view, we hope very much that the information and knowledge and ideas that flow from this summit will help us to shape a really vibrant HELM program. And with that, let me say thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bawa. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really honored to have listened to Professor Bawa. He's not only a thought leader, a philosophical pragmatist, but he is also a deep intellectual. And when he engages with the issues that we are faced with in the sector, he does this from a space of understanding all of the stakeholders and the critical role that all of us play in forging the economy going forward. Thank you, Professor Bawa. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Diane Parker, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Higher Education and Training. Before joining the department in 2008, Dr. Parker spent 18 years as a teacher and educator and academic in the fields of sociology, education, and mathematics education. As DDG, she is responsible for overseeing policy development and implementation and to regulate and support the South African higher education system, including universities and private higher education institutions. The Council on Higher Education, National Institutes of Higher Education, and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. This work includes, amongst others, providing financial support to universities and monitoring and evaluating the use of public funding for infrastructure, teaching, and learning development, as well as research development. In this position, she has led a number of processes and projects, including the successful establishment of 3 new universities and the development of the National Plan for Post-School Education and Training in South Africa. Dr. Parker has published in the fields of teacher education, sociology, and mathematics education. She is a member of a number of committees and boards, including a member on the Council on Higher Education and its HEQC, and the Joint Health Sciences Education Committee in South Africa. She is also a member of the International Governing Board of the BRICS Network University. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Dr. Parker, I just want to commend her for the outstanding work that she has done for our sector. You will not find a government official that works harder than Dr. Parker. She is a reliant figure, somebody that is always available to us in difficult times, but also in good times. She is a colleague, she is somebody of exceptional stature, and somebody that we have the greatest respect for. Dr. Parker, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much for those very kind words. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the HELM virtual summit. I think that for the Department of Higher Education and Training, we're really excited to be able to be part of this really important event. Higher education, leadership and management is critical for us in the system. I'm going to be introducing the panelists for the first round table. And what I'll do is start by calling on each of the panelists. I will read out a little bit about each of them. And then once all the panelists are on the platform, I will then introduce the topic, and we will hopefully have a very stimulating conversation following these great keynote addresses that we received from our minister and from Professor Bawa. So the first panelist I'd like to introduce is our leader, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, who is the Vice Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University, but also the chairperson of Universities South Africa. Professor Mutwa, you can put on your video so that everybody can see you. She holds a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and an MSc in Development Policy and Planning from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Professor Mutwa has a distinguished career both in South Africa and internationally, working in both development and public sector institutions, as well as in academia. Between 2010 and 2017, she was the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Institutional Support at Nelson Mandela University. And as indicated, she is now currently serves as the chairperson of Universities South Africa, which is a member organization representing all South African universities that promotes and facilitates optimum conditions for universities to operate effectively and to contribute to social, cultural, and economic development. She further serves on the Presidential Human Resource Development Council, and prior to joining the university, she served as the Director General of the Eastern Cape Provincial Government from 2004 to 2010. And on her return to South Africa before joining government, she was the Director of the Fort Hare Institute of Government. She is deeply committed to gender justice, social inclusion, and active democratic participation, and accordingly serves on a number of boards and advisory structures, including from the 2014 as a Commissioner of the Financial and Fiscal Commission and serving as its Deputy Chairperson from 2017 to 2019. So we welcome Professor Mutwa to the panel for this particular roundtable. Our second participant and professor is Professor Francis Peterson. And Professor Peterson, if you can please put on your video as well. Francis William Peterson is the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of Free State, and he's been there since 1st of April 2017. He was formerly the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, a Dean of Engineering and Built Environment at UCT, Executive Head Strategy at Anglo-American Platinum, Executive Vice President, Research and Development at Mintech, and Head of Department of Chemical Engineering at the Cape Technicum, which is now the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Prof. Peterson obtained his degrees in B.Eng Chemical Engineering, M.Eng Metal, and PhD Engineering at Stellenbosch University, and completed a short course on financial skills for executive management with IR training. He is a recipient of the Ernest Oppenheimer Memorial Trust and Cape Technicon Researcher of the Year Awards. He's also a regular reviewer and serves on the editorial boards of various international journals. He's a registered professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa and has been a member of the International Panel on Sustainability for Anglo Gold Ashanti, a former advisor to the Anglo-American Platinum Beneficiation Fund, and is a fellow of both the South African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy and the South African Academy of Engineers. Prof. Peterson has published over 150 technical papers and conference proceedings in international journals. So welcome to this roundtable, Prof. Peterson. And then our last, but not least, member of the roundtable is Dr. Sizwe Mabazela. Sizwe Mabazela is the current Vice Chancellor of Rhodes University. Prior to assuming this position in 2014, he was a Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic and Student Affairs at Rhodes University. He earned his doctorate in mathematics at Pennsylvania State University in 1991. He's authored and co-authored a number of research papers in his field of interest, and these have been published in international journals. He's also presented a number of keynote invited addresses at national and international conferences, and between 1992 and 2003, he was an academic in the Department of Pure and Applied Mathematics at the University of Cape Town. He rose through the academic ranks to the level of associate professor and deputy head of department, and in 2004 he was offered and accepted the headship of a full professorship in the Department of Mathematics at Rhodes University. I think Prof. Mabazela has also been an important member of the South African Mathematics Olympiad Committee, and he chaired the 55th International Mathematics Olympiad, which was held at the University of Cape Town. We really appreciate your participation in this roundtable, Dr. Mapazela, and we look forward to the contribution from all our panelists. So as we enter into this roundtable, we've just had two extremely stimulating keynote inputs from our Honourable Minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande, and one of the most venerable leaders of our higher education sector, the CEO of USAf, Prof. Ahmed Bauer. Our theme for this roundtable is the question, how can leadership lead in the age of complexity? And having had the kind of reflections on complexity from Prof. Bauer, I think we've set the scene for this roundtable in a very effective way. So panelists, I'll be expecting responses from you where you would reflect on your own experiences as leaders in higher education in these unprecedented times, but in doing that, reflecting on the inputs from our keynote speakers as well. These times that we're living in are, as has been indicated, complex, and in terms of navigating this complex ecosystem, we're presented with challenges and opportunities for innovation and leadership. So as you reflect on these aspects, we'd like to hear from your vantage point as seasoned higher education leaders, what is required of leadership in ways it might think about its role in an age of disruption, complexity, and uncertainty. So I'd like to start by inviting Professor Francis Peterson to the platform. And Prof. Peterson will give about 8 minutes for your input at this particular point. We will be coming in and out of this discussion because we want to make it quite discursive. Thank you very much. Prof. Peterson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker. And and I also thank you for being on this roundtable and at this first HELM virtual summit. I want to start off by saying that, and I think it came through specifically from the speech of the Minister, the Honourable Minister, and also Professor Bauer, about the critical role that universities are playing. And I think in that critical role, the whole issue of social mobility, and I think specifically Ahmed referred to social justice in that context. But we also talk about economic growth, contribution to the economy. And then for me, it's also to generate new ideas, which is quite crucial. But if we understand, if we try to tackle complexity, the way there are three things that I, as a leader, normally would fall back onto. I first of all would like to start off by understanding what are the challenges that makes the environment complex, uncertain, and disruptive. Because if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to reflect on what and how you should be doing things. The second one is I also would always go back to asking myself the question, what is the purpose of higher education? And we have heard one dimension, and that is in fact two dimensions. The one is the grappling of the role of higher education in society, and that came strongly through what the Minister have said. But it also linked up to the provision of skills and the next generation of knowledge workers, that Professor Bawa referred to. There's obviously a third dimension, and that is to say, well, to what extent we, through our knowledge, can make an impact on the broader society. We didn't come through that strongly, but that would be, so for me, it is to ask that question, the purpose. And the third one then is, how do you connect the purpose and these challenges? And that how is a pathway that one need to then plot in a way that is integrated. And that is what Ahmed also talked about. So we need to also understand that these challenges are impacted by technological innovation, is impacted by economic inequality, and it is impacted by ideological discourse. So it will have an impact in terms of what I would say the future is there's going to be new human inspirations, new roles of knowledge workers and other workers in society, new forms of knowledge production that came out, and new forms of power, which is probably one can put into the governance systems of the organization. So if one then reflect on that program facilitator, then we also have to say about what will guide you. And I think what guides me is that the outcomes need to be equitable, it need to be just, it need to be accessible, empowering and imaginative. And that if that is the outcome, then one would say, well, okay, for myself as a Vice Chancellor, those three questions that I mentioned earlier is important to answer. And the way that I answer that is by framing that, whether it's a health challenge, economic challenge, a climate challenge, or even a social division challenge. And I would frame that within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, because that to a certain extent cover most of the challenges that we are looking at. So it deals with the issues of conflict. It deals with the issues of governance. It deals with the issues of inclusiveness and inequality. And in that frame, we of the Sustainable Development Goals, we understand and try to understand how that Sustainable Development Goals impact the learning in the university, impact our research, impact the engagement with the public, and also impact the responsibility of the responsiveness of running the university as an responsible operation in the context of Sustainable Development Goals. So, facilitator, that is probably where I would start. I will maybe when I come back, we'll talk to you a little bit more in detail in terms of how we then put flesh under those three questions, the frame and the value that we have set aside to be able to push through. But that speaks to exactly what the Minister has been asking, the role of the university in society, but also the role in the university, in an ecosystem that consists of various partners.
Thank you very much, Prof. Peterson. I'm going to not waste any time. I'm going to call immediately on Dr. Mabazela to come to the platform. I think, Dr. Mabazela, as you reflect both on what the Minister and Ahmed said, and also perhaps draw out some of the threads from Professor Peterson, so that we can move this discussion more discursively. Thank you very much. Come in, Dr. Mabazela.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker, and good morning to all the participants, and thanks for the opportunity. We indeed have had two really rich contributions by the Honorable Minister and Professor Bauer. My starting point is that universities are social institutions with a higher social purpose. And I think that is important. They contribute in the culture, in the economic, and in the intellectual advancement of a society. And so that is my starting point. And any university that stands aloof from its surrounding community, from its social context, is a university that is not fulfilling its higher social purpose. So that's where I start. And look, universities are indeed complex organizations. And in my view, nothing can ever prepare one for the complexities and the uncertainties and challenges of leading an institution of higher learning. So no amount of reductionist thinking can address the complex and deeply intertwined challenges that a university leader must deal with. I must say I really enjoyed Ahmed's explanation of complexity, drawing that parallel between complexity in physics and complexity in society and in universities. But one thing that he did not quite elaborate on, which I think is absolutely important, he did touch very briefly on it, is the fact that at times in a complex system, some completely innocuous change in some faraway, obscure place can lead to a violent change at the other end of the system. And that is, of course, when you discuss issues of complexity and chaos theory, that is what is called a butterfly effect. So you have that butterfly effect, and I think it is really important for one to understand that in a complex system, including higher education, you do have this thing called the butterfly effect, where something happens far away and it does not seem to be linked to other things, has a huge impact elsewhere. Of course, there are thousands of books that are written about leadership, and you come across titles like 10 Steps to Leadership and the like. And I must say, I'm always very skeptical about such titles, because leadership in general and leadership of higher education institutions can never be reduced into a finite number of steps that can be encapsulated in a book. So I just want to indicate that. The third thing I want to indicate is that we tend to attach a negative connotation to the word disruption. When one talks about disruption, we get very worried because there's a certain negative connotation attached to it. But it seems to me that from time to time, humanity does need disruption, if only to jolt it out of its complacency. And in fact, disruption can be an important catalyst for human development, human advancement, innovation, and creativity. We as humans get very comfortable and we become very complacent. And we do need from time to time to be jolted out of our complacency. And so I want to link this to the issue of the COVID-19, that despite its massive devastation in human and economic costs, the COVID-19 crisis is playing a significant catalytic role in forcing us to pause, rethink, and reimagine the society and the world in which we live. It is not always that humanity is afforded an opportunity to start anew, a chance to build something new, an opportunity to start afresh. And this, in my view, is what COVID-19 pandemic has gifted humanity. And the current crisis has taught us, it has taught us much, and it continues to teach us new things. So as the minister indicated, the emerging view is that we should not spend time, energy, and resources trying to bounce back to the pre-COVID-19 era, but that we need to leap forward into a different and a better tomorrow. So we must seize this moment and forge ahead with courage, with determination, and with conviction. For us, there is very little to bounce back to because the pre-COVID-19 era has so many challenges. And so we have been jolted, and I think we have all touched upon how COVID-19 has forced us to use digital technology. And that has opened new vistas, opened new opportunities for us to imagine differently. And so there is not much that is exciting to bounce back to insofar as the pre-COVID-19 is concerned. But let us reimagine the future and our higher education, public higher education, might I add, because I think the minister is absolutely right. We should strengthen the public higher education, which is serving the broader society. One can also think about, and we've already mentioned the issue of the student protests of 2015-2016. And those protests were very disruptive. And they spoke to the issues of funding of higher education. And as one Vice Chancellor commented, that the protests achieved in a few days what Vice Chancellors could not achieve in more than a decade. So from time to time, you need these disruptions that force us to move forward in a very, very deliberate way. And of course, there have been issues about fees must fall, roads must fall, and the protests regarding gender-based violence. And again, I don't think that we have done enough to address issues of sexual and gender-based violence, but our young people in our universities exercising their agency and their leadership force us to grapple with all of these issues. And indeed, the issue of sexual and gender-based violence is absolutely critical. We must ensure that our universities become safe places for young people to develop fully, to be able to be well-developed, well-educated, critical, and engaged, compassionate, and empathetic citizens. So thanks to all of those disruptions, we are engaging with issues of curriculum transformation, what is taught, how it is taught, the underlying philosophy regarding our pedagogy and the like, the recognition of the lived experiences of young people, and the acknowledgement that knowledge comes from different parts of the world, and we are no longer privileging knowledge from some part of the world to the exclusion of that which comes from other parts of the world. And so that is important. So on the one hand, we are decentering what may be referred to as, Western knowledge and Western ways of knowing. And we are embracing knowledge coming from diverse parts of the world, particularly that which comes from the South. And so it's really an exciting thing. What does it mean for one as a leader? I'll pick up from there next time. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you very much, Sizwe. Really, I think this is such a stimulating conversation. I'm part of this issue of complexity, the so-called butterfly effect, and the soft touch. Butterflies are soft, but even a soft touch can lead to huge disruption. So I think we, as we reflect on all of these things, we really are, placed in a situation where leadership really has to think very deeply about what this means for it going forward as we bounce into the future, if that's how we could put it. I'm going to invite Prof. Mutwa then, Sibongile, to please come onto the platform. I think particularly from the perspective of the interest in gender-based violence, etc., there has been a question around unpacking the views of panelists on this issue of gender-focused transformative processes, as the Minister had identified, to create safe havens and deliberate focused programs for representativity. And I wonder if, that could be part of what Prof. Mutwa also reflects on as she takes forward this conversation. Thank you, Prof. Come in.
Thank you very much, Tai, for that. And thanks to my colleagues for these very illuminating reflections. Thank you very much. And I actually found, like my colleagues have, the contributions of both the Minister and Professor Bauer quite illuminating. And I am going to just pick on some of the themes that sort of came at me, not touch on everything that they talked about. I think the general theme around the issues of global inequality and the fact that it is widening and deepening, and that we need to turn our attention to it in the manner that we deploy our scholarship. So I think that was a theme. And then the whole question of purposing our higher education enterprise so that it responds to challenges that of the South, but also that it is intrinsically Africa purposed. I think that is very key for our institutions in this country and in the continent. The issue of the outward-facing mission of the university, that it need to be recentered, and I think Cesar has said that, in order that we are fully seized with the commanding challenges to which we have to respond. I do not think that we have done as well as universities as we should have done in this regard. I did note that both the Minister and Professor Bauer emphasized on the positive spin-offs and realizations and lessons that are coming from out of COVID-19. And then the Minister in particular raised the issue of our capacity to have been able to move online so fast and to actually deploy blended learning as a means of trying to finish the academic project. I do want to problematize this a bit because, and I'm very happy that the Minister is proposing that he's going to put together a team of relevant experts that are going to look into this matter going forward so that we do not lose these lessons. But in just appreciating that, I would like to perhaps touch on two things about what I think at the moment is the deployment on online and blended as a crisis response. So I think the opportunity that we are going to have is to look at digitalization and virtualization of education as a norm that we are going to be taking forward. In doing that, we need to, in my view, concentrate on not making two mistakes. One is the possibility of this move deepening inequalities. So we actually do need to pay attention to that. I do think that even though science has been reasserted as very important in our national and global psyche, what has not been centrally and vehemently and robustly discussed are the issues of the social impact of the pandemic. And for me, that includes the deepening of inequality. You just have to walk around the streets to see how many more people that are now on the street than before COVID-19. And then, but the second issue that has to do with virtualization and digitalization of education is the fact that while we praise how online has helped us to catapult and to move forward, is the fact that the value, the intrinsic value of higher education and university education is to impact the character of an individual and to evolve a full individual, and that experience can only come out of the face-to-face social pedagogic encounter that can only be delivered through the classroom experience. And I think we should actually keep that in mind as well. So now, as I'm just moving to just talk to a few points, which some of them my colleagues have naturally mentioned, because I think we are faced with the similar situations. Firstly, I would like to say that as the leadership of universities and as in essence, the leadership of society as well, what COVID has shown us, and I think this was the case before, but I think COVID has perhaps accelerated this. It has shown us that we do not know enough, and we cannot know everything. And every event that comes at us cannot be predicted upfront. And we work with evidence, of course, as scholars. But what evidence is what we know, because science has put that in front of us. What we know as our practices of how we behave, how we run organizations, accepted models of managing institutions, all those things we know. But what COVID showed us is that we actually do not know everything. And that is quite unnerving. As the juggernaut of the higher education system, we actually cannot predict everything that can affect us. Therefore, I think there is a need in the way and the manner in which we approach and lead higher education that we readily accept a reality of multiple futures and lead the system in a manner that gears it better to respond to what I call disruptive unprecedentedness of our world. And then I argue, colleagues, that this requires us to deploy education as an integrative proposition, therefore, so that we prepare our graduates for the future that is uncertain, so that they are able to master both cognate disciplinary excellence, but that is not sufficient, but also that our graduates gain capacity for adaptive expertise, because they will meet the world for which the classroom didn't prepare them for. And then the next point I want to raise, which is the fourth point, is in a highly and increasingly unequal society, and I think this has been said by all our colleagues, the Minister, Ahmed, Sizwe, and Francis, that we are called upon to steer our institutions with purpose towards a social justice angle, which means that we have to be intentional on what we choose to teach, who teaches it, and how it is taught. I also want to speak to, I think both the Minister and Ahmed, this is his favorite topic, the purpose of the university and its courage to face outwards. I do think that vice chancellors and all those that lead universities need to have the courage to do this, because the mission of engagement has been not been prioritized as the other mission of public higher education institutions. So I think that we need to have courage to lead our universities and steer them towards an outward facing angle, in order that we draw from knowledges that are beyond the university, as well as catalyze the pragmatic solutions that society already has without accreditation by the university. And I believe that in turn, that will serve the educational purpose better. And then finally, I want to touch on this very important matter of gender equality. Of course, I'm going not to talk about GBV because I can speak the whole day about that. I've got a lot to say about gender-based violence, but I think I would like to just, as I close for this round, colleagues, to talk about a need for leveling, as I call it, a need for equalization on the gender front in our institutions. And then I'm saying this for a different reason, because the main reason has been stated, which is a transformation reason. But the additional reason for doing this is very, very important, and it's intrinsic. Because our incapacity to mobilize the expertise, the experience equally of both men and women as leaders of our institutions has had the capacity to cancel out a different perspective that men and women bring to the leadership encounter. But also, it has played down and marginalized the experience that women bring to the leadership space, because women are socialized, at least I can speak about our country, they are socialized differently from men. And I'm not saying that as a marginal negative thing. And women have leadership encounters, social encounters that would enrich the way in which we lead our institutions. And there are just not enough of them sitting around the table. And for me, that is the reason, the additional reason to the transformation reason, to say that we are losing out on the perspective of what women leadership stands for, because of the reproductive and productive roles that women have had to combine from time immemorial. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mutwa. I think that's really inspiring. And you know, as you were talking, and I was picking up on that thread of courageous leadership, I think you're absolutely right there. And I think maybe as we go forward, we can just try to unpack a little bit about what that really means as we try to move into this new future, where we consider the perspectives of all of our people, our citizens, our men, our women, and the diversity of our country. And I think linking into that is a whole issue of how our public higher education institutions need to be responsive to all kinds of different aspects. Just reflecting on the whole issue as well around what our purpose is in higher education. I think it would be very interesting to bring these threads through into the conversation. So I'd like to then go back and invite Prof. Francis Peterson to join us again for a further little stint and to provide his perspectives of these and reflect on the discussion so far.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Parker. You know, in terms of, though, one of the issues that came up in both the ministers and Ahmed's presentation was about partnerships. And I think COVID-19 also made that quite abruptly, you know, in terms of we can't do these things that we want to do as universities and fulfill our purpose on our own. We are too interconnected, and I want to take that interconnectedness a little bit further, because the two things that came out strongly for me as a leader has been the whole issue of collaboration, but the next level of collaboration is a level of co-creation. And I want to say that the partnerships should be a partnership that, and I want to call it the ecosystem of innovation. We've heard about innovation and disruption. Let me call it the ecosystem of innovation, is where universities or the higher education system, or even the post-school system, engages with business, private sector, industry, NGOs, government, the public sector, and then try to say, well, how can we complement one another? It's also a form of integration, but it's more than that. And I think it's for us to respond purposefully and intentionally to what society wants. That is the type of ecosystem that need to be generated. So to look at practical examples, because it's often, people often say that vice chancellors talk here in the air, but practical examples, for instance, would be if you define research projects, you define research projects with the end user in mind, and the end user is sitting on the table as you conceptualize it. So industry or government or the NGO is there. When we're talking about knowledge systems, I think my colleague Sibongile have mentioned that the university is not the only place that is the place of the custodian of knowledge. There is so much knowledge that's sitting outside, and how do we bring that in a very integrated way? The third one is when I may talk about how does the economy absorb our graduates. The industry would say universities do not produce graduates that is directly employable. The vice chancellors, or a large proportion of the vice chancellors, probably would say that probably is not our role. Our role is to provide critical thinkers and people that can adapt and innovate. But what is missing is we can't not realize that there is a high unemployment number in the country that we need to deal. So we need to bring that ecosystem closer and say to the industry, what is missing is our mentorship system. And maybe you can work with us, develop a mentoring system within the university while the student's already there, but then dovetail with our curriculum. And therefore, industry, business, and private sector take hands with higher education. And there are probably 5 or 6 that I can cite. So that for me is quite important. And I want to add, because I picked up with some of the question, the whole issue of trust. Do universities still provide that confidence that society believes in universities, believe in the knowledge that comes up? And to come back to my earlier point that I made, Dr. Parker, when I talk about the value system of equitable, just, accessible, there are 2 things that we will have to carry forward pre-COVID, post-COVID. And that is that higher education must never lose their role of leading public thought, and they must never lose their role of being an advocate or provide advocacy for speaking truth to power. And for me, if we start to do that, coupled to the fact that we have an integrated ecosystem, that the university is not seen on their own, we're going to start to slowly regain, if we have lost it, slowly regain that public trust, that people could say, research, as the minister said, in terms of understanding corruption. As Sibongile have said, research and try to understand the social dynamics of COVID-19. And people will come to the university to be able to do that. So I think collaboration, co-creation, building an integrated ecosystem and not losing what the universities have done before pre-COVID, because you can easily throw the baby out with the bathwater by saying that disruption means total change. That is not what it actually means. Disruption means reflecting and then go make your different change. So that is just what I want to say at this point. Thank you very much, Di.
Thank you very much, Francis. I mean, I think that's really thought-provoking, because I think reflecting on the role of universities compared to the role of other aspects of our society is also a critical issue. And this issue of, relevant universities that are providing work-ready graduates. I mean, I think all of us, certainly you have mentioned that, but I always feel that we shouldn't be trying to be relevant in that way, but we do have to be responsive. And sometimes some of the most irrelevant things actually turn out to be extremely relevant in the long run. And we certainly know that in science and in mathematics. So there've been a couple of questions on the chat as well. There's a question around how do we bridge the digital divide? How do we think about the processes of higher education and what complexity really means for us? Do we understand that, and what does leadership mean in that context? I think this reflection on collaboration, co-creation, and the integrated ecosystem is really important. But what does it mean for leadership to be able to take that forward? So I'd like to invite Dr. Mabazela to come back in again, Sizwe, and to give us another bite and reflect on all of these issues with us. Prof. Mabazela?
I have to admit, thank you very much. Thanks, Di. And thanks for the issues that have arisen. I think you did ask the question, what is the purpose of a university, a public university at that? I'm not talking about a private university. And we all understand what the purpose of university is. It's about generation of knowledge. If one stopped there, that would not be enough. And I think I want to link this with the point that was made by the minister regarding the transformation, regarding the relations of knowledge production. So it's about production of knowledge that enriches humanity and broadens our wisdom and understanding of who we are in our natural environment. But I want to link that with something that was mentioned by Ahmed. Generating knowledge being simultaneously locally responsive and globally engaged. In other words, trying to generate knowledge that seeks to respond to the pressing and urgent challenges of our local communities, our society, and at the same time, generating cutting-edge research that can contribute to our accumulated global knowledge. It's not about being parochial. It's about using your vantage point so that you don't spend time researching some narrowly vanishing community in some obscure part of Europe when you have enough challenges just down the road. So it's about that orientation of generating knowledge, doing research that endeavors to free our people from the pestilences of ignorance, want, and the like, and contributing to a better society, a more just, a more humane, a more compassionate, a more equitable, a more fairer society on the one hand. And of course, it is also about the kinds of graduates that we produce. And I want to link this with the issue of the use of digital technology, which Spongile indicated she wanted to problematize. I think we should disabuse ourselves of this notion that, well, because we have technology, we can now just deploy technology and all our challenges are gone. Fact of the matter is, we are social beings. We do need that interaction, and therefore, face-to-face pedagogy and interaction at universities will still be an essential part. However, you can use technology to mediate some of the challenges. If we think of teaching and learning at university as simply about transmitting and acquisition of knowledge, we run the serious risk of producing robots that are highly knowledgeable, but lack the necessary human skills. And those are the kinds of things that young people develop at university, in contact universities, and those extracurricular activities contribute to the holistic educational development and growth of a student. And I don't think we should underestimate the importance of that. It's about formation. It's a formation of a young person. So that in the end, you can produce graduates that are critical and well-engaged citizens, young people who can be agents of change and societal transformation, young people who will not be content with seeing our society or the world as it is, but can imagine a better society and a better world, and can work with passion and conviction to bring about such a world. And so I think these things are important. And I just want to touch on the point that my colleague Francis mentioned here about knowledge. Indeed, universities are not the only custodians of knowledge. There is vast knowledge that resides in our communities. And that is where community engagement becomes important. How do we harness that knowledge that resides in our communities and curate it? Because that is the knowledge that has sustained those communities for generations. Working with communities not as an act of charity, but as a recognition of our common humanity and our shared destiny. And so when we engage in terms of community engagement, we co-create solutions to the problems that our communities have to deal with. And we should not pretend that as institutions of higher learning, we have all the answers to those challenges. We need to humble ourselves, engage with communities as equals, and ensure that there is mutually beneficial, reciprocal relationship and partnership, and co-create the solutions so that we build sustainable communities. And that is another way in which we can ensure that our communities and our society has trust in institutions of higher learning. And we should also disabuse ourselves of looking at universities as skills training colleges. Universities are about developing young people who can solve problems that have not even been thought of at this stage. And so those are some of the points that I just wanted to touch on. But what does it mean for one as a leader? There was a question about conflict. Conflict is a reality of life. The question is, how do you manage that conflict? How do you make sure that you bring around all the people in the institution, various stakeholders, and work together? And by the way, I tell my university community that there's no one who has monopoly to good ideas, not the vice chancellor. And so you can get solutions to challenges coming from places that you least expect. So it's about embracing people, creating avenues for honest, candid engagement, and finding solutions, and being able to deal with conflicts in a responsible way that takes the institution forward. The last point that I must make in this regard, is that we are public institutions. We do not account to any private shareholder. And so once you engage the community with that understanding that we are all working together to advance the intellectual endeavor of the institution that even the gardener has an important role in this whole enterprise. And I think it starts to build a stronger relationship that helps people move forward together, so that there is no notion that, this is management executive and we are just ordinary people. We are all in this together. Thank you very much, Dai.
Thank you very much, Sizwe. I think this issue of universities and university leadership, in fact, being more humble, is really a critical one as we think about going into this kind of changed world. The issue of anti-intellectualism is something that we've seen across the seas in one of our very large countries, what we call it, all kinds of things there where anything goes as truth. But what we have to be doing is working within our university system to develop that trust. And COVID definitely has created more trust in science than was previously there. But at the same time, it's also created distrust because of the huge inequalities that we have within our country, particularly, and the fault lines that we've seen across society. So I suppose this issue of us being able to develop social compacts to co-create, to engage with our communities, and to reposition higher education in a way that is far more accessible and humble, I suppose, is a critical aspect for us to think about. So I'd like to invite Sibongile, Prof. Mutwa back again to maybe go deeper into some of these threads that have been highlighted in the conversation so far. Prof. Mutwa?
Thanks, Dai. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about going deeper, but I will definitely reflect on some of the issues that my colleagues have raised. I mean, the issue of partnerships. I think we have all advanced because for pragmatic reasons, but also for making sure that we preside over institutions that are beneficiaries of all walks of experience that we bring to the educational space. So I really believe in that for both intrinsic and pragmatic reasons that we need to be committed to partnerships beyond the public higher education space. I do want to just go back to the point that Ahmed was raising about public universities as anchors. I think that is a very appropriate word. We prefer to call it universities as instruments of convergence, if you like. Because convergence, for me, situates the university not at the top of at the pinnacle, but it actually assumes that the university is important in society. It is one of the oldest institutions, but it has got its blind spots. And in order to fulfill its mission well, it needs to meet society, meet other sectors at the threshold of their own understanding of human suffering and human condition. So I really believe in universities as instruments of convergence. So just to elaborate on that point of universities as anchors, which then presupposes visibility, knowledge that is totally vocal about what is not going right in society. And the minister touched on the issue of corruption, touched on the issue of failures in some of our governance systems within our own universities, but also all the happenings that we are seeing in the public media, in the Zondo Commission, and so on. The universities cannot stand aside and not engage with these issues. But the best way and the most sustainable way in which we can engage with these issues, obviously, is to make sure that our own graduates are quite seized with the issues of property and rectitude in public life. One last point that perhaps I would like to touch on is this issue of complexity. And for me, complexity is what just we live every day. I have found that on a given day and a given week, I am challenged. I mean, everything that you thought you knew about strategic leadership and management is set aside. It happens like every week. And then you are stunned. And you are inspired, you are humbled, and then you are on a permanent learning curve. And then for me, I then say that what is then the small contribution that a vice chancellor and perhaps the top team of the university can make a small contribution that can make, because the big system that the university system is, it has got such a lot of participants, most of them that are much more gifted and much more accomplished than us as vice chancellors. So I have always seen, let me just talk about my own value, my own contribution, that our own contribution is to at least to be seen to be taking the nobility of the role of the Vice Chancellor and their top team to lead institutions that are committed to do right, to lead institutions that well, that people that are in those institutions, both students and staff, can be proud of, because the vision is clear, the vision is progressive, and then the integrity and the ethical tone in which the university is led is sound. And in that way, because turbulences will come and go at universities. But I think we should be able to make society to be proud of the institutions that we manage and run, and the stakeholders within universities to push forward, especially in these difficult times, because they know that my university stands for something. And I'm talking this not about my university in particular, but about the system. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Mutwa. I mean, time is just flying past and we have only a very few minutes left. So I'm actually going to just hand back directly to Prof. Peterson to say maybe the last minute or two, just to round off your reflections in terms of this conversation.
To develop a stable, strong, resilient public university sector or public universities. And I think both the Minister and Ahmed talk about leadership, which is crucial, finances, which is crucial. I do think partnerships need to be in there, and the ecosystem that I explained need to be in there. But also our next generation of academics needs to be in there. And those are the things that I do think we need to, with all of the other things, with governance, engagement with our stakeholders, internal, external is crucial. But I want to make one last point, just as a throwaway, and then I'll make a last point. the power of data and the power of information is going to be immensely crucial. And leadership of universities will have to understand that. It comes with risks, but it comes with massive opportunities. And my last parting point, in a way, is coming back to the point that you made, and also Sipungile made. It's about the humbleness. And I call it deep listening. That's actually what it's about. It is, I want to create the analogy by saying I'm putting the head, the heart, and the hand together. The head to think, to reflect, and that's exactly what we're doing now. The deep listening, the empathy, how you do it, and to be able to include everybody in there, or as most of them. And then very importantly, leadership can't only do that. Leadership will have to act. And therefore the hand is the action. If we can put those three, the head, the heart, the hand, and we use that as a phrase for bouncing forward, then I think we are on track to build that resilient, strong public university sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Peterson. I'm quickly going to ask Sizwe to come in for a last little bite. We sort of run out of time, but I want you and Prof. Mutwa to just have one last say. Come in, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker. Professor Mutwa mentioned something that is really, really important: issues of probity and moral rectitude. That is not something that one teaches, it is something that one models. And if we model that kind of moral rectitude and probity, that is what the young people will learn. And I think that is important in the context of issues of corruption that we see in our society. There are just a few points that I want to make in conclusion, Dai. One, I think as a leader, you must engender trust and confidence. Two, I think you must be self-aware, and you must know your strengths and you must know your weaknesses. Thirdly, you must rely on distributed leadership so that at every level, everyone is able to exercise their agency, their leadership agency. And fourthly, I think we should allow different views and perspectives to find expression. Solutions lie in the interface of different perspectives and views. Fourthly, we must always keep an open mind and be willing to be persuaded by logic and reason. And the last point I want to make is that leadership is also about following one's instincts. Do not be afraid to make decisions for fear of making mistakes. But do not be reckless about that. Complexity, uncertainty take a toll at one's emotional well-being. It creates stress, anxiety, fear, and frustration. And I think that must be recognized and be managed appropriately. But again, the most important thing for me about leadership is communication, communication, and communication. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you very much. Prof. Mutwa, you've got the last word. We will end with you. Please come in.
Thanks, Dai. Thanks, colleagues. I'm not really going to say much, but I'm going to say that I think we're being called upon to re-examine the purpose of the university and then our role in it, in fulfilling that purpose. And I think the time has not been more urgent than it is now. So I really want to end there and to really thank the insights, your insights and the insights of my colleagues and the keynote speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the round table panelists. We really appreciate your courageous leadership in these times of disruption. Thank you.
Well, let me let me say thank you to all four of you. I'd like to special thank you to Dai for facilitating the session, which I thought was very rich. And to the Vice Chancellors, Mutwa, Mabizela, and Peterson, just to say, such a rich discussion. I mean, I know that the HELM team have taken copious notes and so on, so it'll all feed into the program, I'm sure. And I think perhaps the most critical issue, I think, was the very last statement made by Professor Mutwa, which is that we really have to come to grips with what the purpose of the university is as a social institution, and then kind of really unpack that, if you like. And I think that's both an institutional question that needs to be posed and a sectoral question, I think, that needs to be posed. So as you can see, I'm standing on a road. We can either, as a sector, we can either walk into the sunset after a long, long time, or we can walk into the context, if you like, and just kind of really understand how the universities as institutions and the universities as a sector can influence the quality of life of people. At the end of the day, that's what universities are about. Just how do we improve the quality of life of people? And of course, we have our special role to play in that. So just to say thank you so much. Thank you so much to the four of you. And I'm sure that your discussions will feed into the program. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I'm handing over to Linda Meyer, who will tell you about the next session. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible morning to have shared it with such intellectuals, such deep thought leaders, and really something that was enriching and really pivoted us for the rest of the summit. I would like to announce that we are going to break for lunch shortly, and we will return at 1:30 to the collaborative platform. Will be open during this time for delegates to engage with one another. So please use the opportunity to set up networks. After lunch, we will have 3 parallel sessions. Each of the parallel sessions will run and will be facilitated by the following individuals. Parallel session 1 is titled Building a Resilient and Sustainable Higher Education System, and will be chaired by the facilitator, Mr. Ahmed Esop. Mr. Esop is an independent consultant and research associate of the Ali Mazrui Center for Higher Education Studies at the University of Johannesburg. He has over 20 years' experience and is well known within the sector. He has been involved in the key policy initiatives linked to transformation of the higher education system in South Africa, having served as the CEO of the CHE between 2010 and 2015, and as a Chief Director for Higher Education Planning in the former Department of Higher Education and Training in 1997 to 2005. Prior to that, he served in various positions, including Deputy Director General of the Center for Education Policy Development, which coordinated the development of education and training policy of the ANC in the early 1990s. Mr. Esop holds an honours degree in sociology from the University of Essex and a master's in international development education from Stanford University. This follows then concurrently with parallel session 2, which is titled Driving Excellence and Sustainability Through Strategic Financial Planning. The facilitator will be Dr. Bernadette Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the Director of Transformation and Employment Equity at the University of the Witwatersrand. She has extensive experience in higher education and has held executive and senior managerial level positions in universities. She has also worked on the National Committee for the Next Generation of Black Scholars program, which was the foundation of the now NGAP program in universities. Other areas of expertise include her work at Palama, facilitating strategic planning and change management, and she has worked in various countries in Africa. She has also worked at the Southern Research and Innovation Managers Association as a research project manager. A very thoughtful and engaging individual, and this session surely is something to attend. For parallel session 3, we have the facilitator, Mr. Ewan Prens. The Technology Disruption and Implication is the title of this session. Mr. Prenzes is a passionate EdTech professional helping educational institutions transform and thrive across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. He has a proven record of success with technology initiatives from inception to deployment with local and national wide exposure in higher education, both in Sweden, Norway, Iceland and K-12 with Malta. So that's a number of countries in which he has worked. Working for progressive global companies like Microsoft, Google, Volksuniversiteit and Instructure, where he has helped institutions to solidify and advance their technological platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, surely this is going to be a very insightful series of sessions after lunch. We invite you, please, to enjoy lunch. Please make use of the facilities during lunch to collaborate, and we look forward to seeing you after lunch. Thank you.